Okay, so I'm here to do a demonstration video for Dave and his kids in his class, a shop class, that recently purchased a 3D printer, a Creality Ender 3. And I'm just going to do a basic video on how to download an STL off the internet, pull it into Cura, and slice it so that you can upload it to SD card and push it to your 3D printer. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Thingiverse, which is an open source database of STLs or models that people have created, and just felt the need to get them out there and yeah, just create a whole community around 3D printing. So we'll go to thingiverse.com. And I believe the kids in Dave's shop wanted a Yoda figurine. So we're going to search for a Yoda. And I think the first one I'll probably select is probably the Polygon Yoda here. Polygon are a pretty good model to start with for 3D printing. They're pretty basic shapes and can just be a little bit easier to print. So we're going to just take this. So once you find your model that you want on Thingiverse, you're just going to click Download All. Give it a few seconds to watch your ad. They need to get their revenue somehow. And then as soon as it's downloaded, we're going to open up that zip file. And just to make this super basic, I'm going to drag it to the desktop. And yep, I have it down there on the desktop. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to open Cura. And Cura is a slicing software. And so what it essentially does is take an STL and converts it into G code for the 3D printer to be able to read, and translates all the movements into X, Y, Z coordinates and all the other settings that the printer uses, like extruder speed and the extruder tip temperature, the bed temperature, all that. So if this is the first time for you downloading Cura, what you're going to want to do is import your 3D printer. And more or less give Cura the settings of your printer, like the maximum build volume, your XYZ coordinates, your maximum XYZ coordinates, and sets the 0 point. And they make it really easy because they have more or less presets for all the different type of printers out there. I'm sure there's a bunch of them that aren't included, but Cura does have quite a few of them. So what we're going to do is click on this first tab here, and you're going to go to Add Printer. And what you do is go to Add a Non-Networked Printer. And you're going to scroll down through this list of different printers until you find the printer that you have. And so we're going to look for a Creality, as that is the manufacturer of this printer. Whoops, past that a little bit. There it was. Just going to click on that, and you're going to select the model that you have. And we're going to use a Creality Ender 3. It's probably one of the most popular printers out there. And just going to hit the Add button. I'm going to click Cancel because I already have it added. But what you essentially have in there is this is essentially what it loads when you load your Creality Ender 3 printer. It has the beginning and ending G code, so what it does when it first starts the print, as well as the bed volume, and if it has a hotbed, several other things. So that's what's being loaded when you select your printer in there. The next thing that you're going to want to do is select the material that you have. Since this is more or less for beginners, you're going to probably just use the generic preloaded materials that they have in here. That should be good enough for starting out at least. And we're going to use PLA, so it's already selected. And what that has in there, more or less, is pretty much all this data for your material, the density of it, the filament cost. You can actually add in there so you can know, so you can tell how much your prints are going to cost per part. And you essentially just put in the filament cost and the weight that you bought. So 1 kilogram has been purchased here. Another typical one is a 500 gram spool of filament. So that's what you're loading in there. So we have it selected as generic PLA. And then the other thing that you're going to definitely want to select here is the correct nozzle diameter. The most common one is 0.4 millimeter nozzles. So just come in here and select that one if that is the nozzle that you're using. If you're using a larger or smaller one, you can select it from this list. And then the final tab here is probably the most intensive tab. It has all the settings for your 3D printer, as far including quality, wall thickness, all the details on your walls, your top and bottom layer, your infill, the type of material, settings, your speeds, your travel. There's just a plethora of settings, and most of them you really don't have to mess with if you're just starting out. And I'll kind of just show you how many settings there actually are. You know, I'm scrolling down here and there's just a bunch of settings that it would take probably someone forever to really dive into 3D printing and understand all these settings. I'm not even down at the bottom of the list here. So anyway, what you really need to know is probably your layer height. That kind of determines your quality of your print. Your wall thickness. I've heard that your wall thickness probably plays a larger role in strength of your print compared to your infill, which is down below here. So you can play with your wall thickness there and some of the settings you want there, but really you just need your layer height for your quality. And then your infill is probably another important one. I usually keep it around 30%. You get diminishing returns as you get up to the 100% infill range. You really get your bang for your buck at the 30% range. The infill pattern, I never really messed around with different types of patterns, but there is a plethora of different types of patterns that you can choose from here. We're just going to use cubic. The other important thing is your material will need to be extruded at certain temperatures. So PLA is pretty close to about 200 degrees Celsius. And you can look at your packaging. It'll tell you what the printer should be set at, and then you can mess around with it a little bit to kind of tweak your settings or to tweak the quality of your print. The build plate is another important temperature that you're going to want to control. 60 degrees is what I've been using here. If your print's not sticking to your bed, you might want to increase the temperature. That'll kind of help it adhere a little bit better. And then print speed, I just stay between probably 30 millimeters a second to 70 millimeters a second. I usually get pretty good prints in that range. Obviously, the faster you go, the faster the print will be. And the slower you go, the lower or the better quality you're going to have. And the only other important thing you should probably play around with as you're getting started is your supports and your build plate adhesion. So supports is for any print that is overhanging at what I have here, 51 degrees. You can change how many degrees of overhang before it generates supports. 51 is probably a good place to be. Default, I think, is 45 degrees. And then you can tell Cura where to put those supports. If you want it either just where if you draw a straight line off the build plate, it's going to touch something, or you can put everywhere. So it's going to actually build supports on top of your model if there's overhangs that overhang over your model. And then the build plate adhesion, this kind of helps with a couple different things. Skirt, that pretty much just unclogs the nozzle or allows any kind of debris to be removed before it actually starts printing your model. You can also use brim for that same reason. Raft is a pretty good one. It kind of builds a whole, literally a raft, I guess, that the print prints on top of. So that kind of helps with your bed level. If you're just a little bit out, it kind of reduces the tolerance that your print needs to print a decent model without it turning into spaghetti. So we're going to just leave skirt on there. And what you're going to do once you have your settings kind of figured out is you're going to come over here and click open. So you go find your model. And we're going to import the Yoda STL. And there it is. So it kind of gives you a scale of references. This is your build volume of your printer. So if you know how big your printer is, it kind of gives you an idea of how large this thing is. And you can move it around by clicking it, and you can drag the arrows to move it in one of the 3 axes, or you can just free roam it around just by clicking and moving it around like this. And then you can also rotate it. I'm going to rotate 90 degrees so it's pointing towards the front of the printer. And again, you can just select one of these arrows to rotate in whatever axis you want. You can also change the size of it. So say if this print, you wanted it to be larger, you can just grab one of these little legs here and just pull it, and it will just increase in size. And right now it's selected for uniform scaling, so it'll increase that same percentage on all 3 axes. You can unselect that, but then you can get some kind of weird, funky models. But if that's something you're looking for, go ahead. You can specifically change the percentage to what you want as well, just by typing it in here. So we're going to keep it at 100% and hit enter. And then another thing you can do is, some of these other settings are like we're going to just leave normal setting, but these are some of the other types of settings you can use. You can mirror the print, and there's several other things you can do here. You can play around with it if you want, but what I've showed you is pretty much the basics of what you really need to get started. So after you get it where you want on your build plate, we're going to put it in the middle. You can select this button here, which is slice, and this is what actually goes through the algorithm to transform this STL file into 3D or G code for your 3D printer to read. So we're going to click on that. It takes just a few seconds for it to actually slice. The larger the print, the longer this takes. So as you can see here, it's going to give you an estimate. This says 8 hours, 20 minutes. That's fairly accurate. It's not 100%, so it might take a little bit longer. And then I had the how much I paid for this filament in here. So this is going to be an 83 cents to print this model. It's going to cost me. And after you're done slicing it, you can actually go up here to preview and select that. And I'll actually show you kind of what it's going to look like in its 3D printed form. As you can see here, as well as the print, are the supports here. And I believe I have touching everywhere, so it's actually building supports on his shoulder here to build up support for his ear. So if I just had touching build plate, it actually wouldn't build up a support here because it's not touching the build plate. Only the areas such as this right here would be generated, around his chin and part of his ear. So that's what it's going to look like when it prints. You're going to have your brim here, or your skirt, and that's just it'll do this first to kind of clear up the nozzle and then start printing away. So once you're happy with it, you can just hit save to disk if you want to save it somewhere, or if you have your SD card in here, it'll give you the option to save to your SD card, and then you can just click that and then go ahead and pull that out of your computer and then insert it into your 3D printer, and you're off to the races to get your model printed. Another quick thing to note here is if you look underneath the model, wherever it's red, that's where you're exceeding that maximum angle before you need a support. So it's pretty much showing you everywhere that's going to require supports. And sometimes you can kind of get away with it if you don't want to turn supports on. That's something you can kind of play around with if you want to try that out. So I think that's about it. So I'm going to leave it at that, and best of luck to y'all.